Welcome back. Thanks for joining us on another episode of the Rentvesting Podcast. Now, as we know, we all grow up in different worlds. And by that rationale, I guess we invest for different reasons. And because of that, does that mean the rules around it have to change as well? I say this because for any first-time Australian real estate investor, the modern housing market looks undeniably difficult to get into. But quite often, buying into this perception needs to be handled with care, as those preaching the overwhelming difficulty of such a thing are forgetting one important factor in what it means to be a modern investor. So, let's get to it. You go to school, go to university, or you get a trade, or start full-time work in some capacity. Get married and you pop out a couple of kids and get a dog, and then you get a nice white little picket fence to contain it or, wrap around it. Just to make sure you follow what everyone else is doing along the way. Now, do you think that sounds familiar? Well, for most people under the age of 50, they'll respond with a resounding yes, followed by a confession that begs the question, and why on earth would anyone want that? Contrastingly, of course, there are those over the age of 50 who will follow the choir with a resounding yes, and only this time follow it with a slightly confused look of, what? You mean there's another way people would rather do it? Now, it's hardly a revelation to realize that it's not only the years on this earth that separate the quality of lives from one generation to the next. The likes, the dislikes, values, and preferences of one generation are also practically always significantly different from the ones preceding it. But what so many can fail to actually notice is that sometimes the behaviours and the values of adjacent generations can find themselves being mistakenly mixed up. This, I believe, is, a pretty dangerous threat to the actual fulfilment of any modern generation beginning to establish itself within the professional working and investment world, as we find ourselves in which today. The generalized, beliefs and values of one generation, formed by their respective environment at their own respective time, can often be handed down to the next generation coming through, even though the new modern environment doesn't necessarily suggest those values and beliefs are still valid. This, generational difference that we actually find ourselves in is really, I think, just about a transfer of knowledge. Knowledge that can be learned, but is it ever going to be needed again? Sure, the values of generations gone past were highly relevant at one stage, but have they remained completely relevant in exactly the same way in the modern world in which we now live in? And the answer to that is absolutely not. What I'm saying is that knowledge has retained its truthfulness, but it's actually lost its practicality. And with the evolution of the technological and online world in which we live in, it's pretty evident that us younger peeps have become far more proactive and open-minded to new ideas. Yet, so many of the beliefs and values that have actually forced our hand in guiding our decisions still exist in places where they aren't necessarily welcome anymore. We live in this world that now embraces people's own unique reasons for working and investing and connecting, and ultimately living. The world is seeing changes in the way people work and, a more human-centric platform where generations in the past are still marveling at the idea of having a remote office. The world is experiencing this massive shift, and it's a shift away from the typical nuclear family that supports that white picket fence mentality to, any imaginable family unit that suits the respective lifestyles of those involved, where those of older generations can't actually understand why people aren't settling down and having kids at 23. I believe the modern world has changed its values to become a lot more respectful of individuals' preferences that take into account their own unique desires of each and every individual. Whilst we're becoming more respectful, we still have a long way to go, but, that's for another podcast. People, are certainly understanding now, though, that they can work for their own reasons, get married or stay single for their own reasons, and have children or not for their own reasons. And the values of generations gone past are slowly but surely losing their grip on the modern world that is making its own choices. And where is one of the most evident places in which this shift in thinking is actually taking place? Well, real estate investment, of course. It is a real estate and investment podcast, so I had to throw it in somewhere. But, generations in the past have typically insisted that the major reason for investing in real estate is security, demanding a strict budget and sacrificing of a flexible lifestyle in order to attain it. I spoke about this on last week's podcast. But, modern investors, however, they're embracing the fact that those values and beliefs don't have to apply to a generation that prefers a lifestyle and a financial strategy that is different to their parents and their grandparents. Modern investors have ditched the idea that security must be the reason for which someone would invest in real estate, and instead they're adopting their own and far more relevant purposes for investing. People understand that the real estate market appears difficult to get into, only if you're strictly buying for security purposes. They can see how flexibility and lifestyle might make it a bit of a backward step when investing in real estate, but only if you choose the pathway that demands you squeeze every cent out of it. People are now taking the opportunity to invest in real estate in ways that allow them to invest for reasons such as comfort instead of security, lifestyle instead of retirement, and versatility instead of restriction. Savvy modern investors see the current housing market and marvel, at how the current working generation strips itself of the opportunities right in front of their eyes, all because they're seeing it through the eyes of a generation that isn't their own. A generation that values, completely different lifestyle and financial strategies to their own. A generation that was influenced by significantly different economic and financial factors to the ones that exist today. A generation that is still trying to teach anyone who will listen how to use a rotary phone. So, to take a step back and admire your own financial future ahead, I guess I want to ask the question, have you actually been making assumptions based on the investment beliefs and values of generations gone past? Or is it the generation in which you currently live? Also, it's worthwhile asking that, are you investing for the reasons of others? Or are the reasons those of your own? And how does any of these realizations change the way in which you look at opportunities that are now before you? So I'm going to leave you with those questions and wrap it up, because that's another episode of the Rentvesting Podcast. Now, come December, I do have a pretty big lineup of guests that will be coming onto the show, but for the next few weeks, it's going to be me. So I guess it might be better rephrased as the Rentvesting Podcast, because I have a lot more to say about this topic. For those of you who haven't been onto the website yet, please do check it out, www.rentvesting.com.au. I've heard some awesome feedback. I've heard a couple of critiques on some bumps that need to be ironed out. But look, I would encourage you to jump on there and check it out for yourself and share your thoughts with me. And for those of you without a copy of my book, please jump on to the website again, the address rentvesting.com.au, and claim your free copy. I'll pop it in the post for you in the coming days. The web link will also be available in the summary box of the podcast, so be sure to check it out. But look, I'll leave you with those thoughts, and until next week, bye-bye.